Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly Podcast. It's a special episode today to mark the launch of the 2023 Wisden. I'm Yas Rana, and with me this afternoon is Phil Walker, Mark Butcher and Lawrence Booth, the editor of the 2023 Wisden. Let's start with the Wisden 5. Lawrence, who are they?
The Wisden 5, Tom Blundell, Ben Folkes, Harmanpreet Kaur, Daryl Mitchell and Matthew Potts, with the usual caveats about the award. Emphasis on the English summer. You can only be chosen once. Do I really have to repeat myself? But I just have.
I was going to ask, why wasn't Bairstow one of them? I thought he did quite well last
God's sake.
I guess picking two players from a touring side that lost 3-0 doesn't happen very often. But was part of that because of how amazing that series was and kind of how memorable that was and how big those two players were in making it so memorable.
Yeah, I mean, 3-0 was a weird scoreline, wasn't it? Because England chased down 270 twice and 299 once. So it was slightly freakish, 3-0 win. It could have been 3-0 the other way, really. And had it been that, then Blundell and Mitchell, their stature would have risen even higher. But they were sensational. And without those two, England would have cakewalked the series. But Blundell averaged 76, Mitchell averaged over 100, and England couldn't get them out pretty well each time. So it was weird. Two guys from the visiting team that lost 3-0, but it was hard to ignore them.
And Harmanpreet Kaur as well. She played one of the innings of the summer at Canterbury.
Yeah, 143 not out of 111 balls. India hadn't won a one-day series in England since the previous millennium. And she should have won a Commonwealth gold, shouldn't she, really? She was leading that run chase against Australia, one of the greatest cricket teams of all time, and she got out to 60-odd. So she got the silver, and she feels like the next generation of Indian women's cricket after Mithali Raj retired, and she leads them a bit of fire, doesn't she?
And there's a new award. The Wisden Trophy used to be awarded to the winner of the England-West Indies Test Series, but that's now named after Ian Botham and Viv Richards. Now it's awarded to the Test Performance of the Year. There was a short list of 10, 3 of which came from one guy, Johnny Bairstow, and he was the guy who won it. What was it about the Edgbaston performance over the Trent Bridge and Headingley heroics that pipped it for you?
Well, I mean, he scored 200s in that game, so just the 100 in the other game. Pull his socks up, really. And England in the Edgbaston game, they chased down 378, which was a national record, and they did it for the loss of 3 wickets. I mean, you sort of felt like they could have chased down 500 that day. And that, I think, after those 3 chases against New Zealand, that chase against India really cemented in the minds of the public that there was something special going on with this team. And Bairstow was the Bazball poster boy, wasn't he, last summer, until he broke his leg, and Harry Brook kind of took over in Pakistan, New Zealand. Bairstow was the guy who started waving that flag first off. So, yeah, again, a reasonably straightforward choice for me, anyway.
Butch, I think we mentioned this on last year's podcast, but you hold the record of having the most England Test caps without being Wisden Cricket of the Year.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's slightly awkward one.
The awards themselves, I find them very distasteful and often extremely wrong. Mainly for that reason. In fact, I can't believe we've opened the podcast talking about it, to be honest, especially as we only came second in the Wisden list of podcasts as well. I mean, we couldn't even win our own.
Hold on, that's not entirely accurate. No, we are now apparently the best of the UK offerings.
According to
Wisden. So Wisden is now the best of the UK offerings according to Wisden.
Yeah.
Okay.
But obviously,
right. So I rest my case.
Steward's inquiry, no doubt about it. It rather lacks for credibility. However, we've been studiously ignored in previous podcast write-ups in the Wisden Almanack.
I feel like
the dam burst this year. The pressure told we had to reflect the reality of the quality of this pod. I'm not saying today's is any good, but in general.
But in terms of the Players' Awards, hopeless. I don't know why anybody bothers listening to it, let alone gets upset about what happens.
I feel like it's very BBC.
I'm not upset.
Not at all.
Never have been.
I was going to ask that Bairstow streak is genuinely one of the greatest streaks of batting ever. But you've been a fan of Bairstow for years. Did you think he had that in him?
Well, not like that, but
kind of what happened. How many
times on this podcast over the years have I said that all of the nonsense about Johnny Bairstow keeping wicket and batting at 7 and doing all this kind of stuff was rubbish because he is one of the best batters that we've got in the country. I don't know how many times. So this is all basically down to me. It's one of those days. I knew he was an extremely good player. I mean, you don't have the sort of ODI stats, some of the leading ODI stats ever, without being a terrific player. And then a combination of that, a combination of him being given the responsibility and the knowledge that he's going to bat 5, that's your spot. Not keeping wicket for hundreds of overs at a time before he has to go out and bat, and playing in a team that's going out with the express purpose of entertaining people, is absolutely it's all of the worlds colliding beautifully for him. And it's a massive shame that the golfing incident, the accident, which is a sort of football warm-ups, got banned, and there are lots and lots of cricket fans who hate golf with an enormous passion. I'm looking at one over there in Phil, and so that they might ban England players from doing. They might not actually have a team if they were to do that, but they might ban England players.
Yeah, I mean that would be mutiny.
that would be the end of it. No one would ever go on tour again.
That's it. Yeah, that would be it for England's test.
We didn't quite say it in the New Zealand tour, but there was element of wanting to play golf in their declaration, I think, at Wellington.
Yeah, no doubt. Get it done in 4.
Yeah. And they would have admitted that as well. But look, I mean, I suppose that it now sort of throws up this tantalising game within a game of there's only a certain amount of batting spots in the England team. Ben Foakes has kind of come out at the beginning of the season, one of the 5. And sort of said, well, you're not having my spot, making the 100.
And he's been brilliant as well, right?
And he is brilliant. I mean, and he's shown that, proven that in an England shirt anyway. And now you've got sort of 6 places, with 7 players looking for them. And there's an obvious weak spot there somewhere. I'm not even going to say his name because
it's not necessary.
It makes no difference. It makes no difference what anybody says or what logic says. But there is a player in there who hasn't pulled up any trees and who is under increasing pressure. And you've got these 2 guys in Bairstow and Harry Brook sort of vying for the number 5 spot. Brook's already sort of said, because he's a clever boy, or at least he's cricket smart anyway. He sort of said, well, look, I'll bat anywhere. Don't worry about me. I'll go wherever you put me. And Johnny would be very, very keen to reprise number 5 all over again. So you've got we've gone a long way off piste, but that's kind of what it does, isn't it? This whole conversation.
Because this is the question that everybody is asking more and more, and it's only going to be ramped up over the next few weeks. So let's do it. Sod it. Let's do it now. If speaking theoretically, right, if we believe in the principle that you've got to pick your best players and fit them into a top 6, right, as a theory. And if we feel like Zak is not quite the answer at the minute, etc., and that he's going to be moved aside, which is all theoretical and probably unlikely anyway, but if it were to come to pass, Lawrence, where do you go? Well, who opens the batting? Assuming that Duckett is your other man, who opens the batting alongside Duckett?
I'll go back a couple of steps. Start from first principles. Who's keeping wicket? For me, it has to be Foakes.
Right? Done. Okay,
so if Foakes is there, and Bairstow obviously comes back in and you're keeping Brook, and you're dropping Zak Crawley, then the only other option is a mad option, but you wouldn't put it past him, and that is Ben Stokes to open.
Yes, I agree with this.
Listen, could he score fewer runs than Zak Crawley? I don't think he would. I think he might win you a couple of games. What have England got to lose by trying him up there? The other alternative is keeping Crawley in and leaving out one of the guys we've just mentioned, which would be Foakes, which would be unfair. So
it would be unfair. It would also put Johnny back in the position that he was in before, where he'd never been as productive as he was as a lone batter batting at number 5. So to me, that's not the answer.
So what is
it's a huge compromise, and it's one of those things whereby, and it's kind of one of those Alex Stewart conversations in reverse, where you would compromise Alex's ability with the bat in order to give the team balance. Now, what you'd be doing here would be you'd be compromising Johnny's ability with the bat in order to give the team balance, to have him bat at number 7 and keep wicket. And I think that's unnecessary,
right?
Because there is a bloke in the 11 that none of those blokes would score less runs than, no matter where you put him.
Would you open with Stokes?
Yeah, but I wouldn't. I perhaps wouldn't do it with him. I might ask Harry Brook to do it.
Yeah.
So that's the way that I would lean. And
really?
I said this to you a few weeks. I decided it about 2 a.m, having racked my brains.
I've done this without any alcohol. But Stokes. But the thing is with Stokes is that and why Lawrence's shout is a good one is that Stokes might go, well, look, I'm not going to ask anybody to do anything I wouldn't do myself. So sod it, I'll do it.
Yeah. The point about the Stewart doctrine, if you like, that it would be weakening Stokes's Majesty at number 6 would be obviously a counterpoint to the argument. And I understand the argument, by the way. Technically, he's as sound a player as they got inside, perhaps with the exception of Root. And I guess there would be extra onus on him to get his head on, having maybe been overworked in the field and then suddenly got to go and strap them on. That would be an added element of pressure or a kind of mental challenge that he'd have to.
They don't do pressure though.
No, they don't. They don't. I mean, they say they don't. I can understand it for sure. I like, in this weird scenario, I like the Brook idea. I think he's technically sound enough. I think he'll nick off from time to time, of course he will. But I think his cricket smarts, as Mark says, they're so advanced for a kid of his age. And I know he's not done it before, but you've seen players in the past who have moved up and down the order. You've seen players who have opened as makeshift openers and then gone back into the middle order and vice versa. It has happened before. I think he's adaptable enough, and I think if he survives the first hour,
it's a big if though against coming.
It is, but it's a big if against every option. Every option out there is a big if, right?
But I feel like with last summer, but you asked Stokes about this at the end of it. He basically didn't bat normally, with the exception of one innings, and he scores 100. England kind of did what they did without Stokes being at his best, and I think that I kind of like the way you phrase it, Lawrence. You kind of have these immovables, and I think for me, Brook has done so well in a specific position. He's so early in his career. Why risk changing anything? He has been the form. He's not just the form England player at the moment. He's the form Test batter in the world doing this thing. Why change that?
But you could also argue that if it's the fourth innings of an absolute, clutch Test match, who's your best finisher? Who's got the biggest balls? Who's going to see it through? Who's not going to blink?
Ben Stokes,
Root, and obviously Ben Stokes at number 6. So again, you can make a case and you can disprove it all across the board. But I think. I
don't think you're messing with somebody like Harry Brook's career in doing this. It's not that's I think for me that's where it becomes more palatable. It's not ideal. None of it's ideal. So we're not talking about sort of like this is the best thing to happen and it's going to work forever. But I just don't. I think Harry Brook is so good that you're not messing with him too much.
Right. Exactly.
He might have the odd. He might have a bad series. I mean, who knows? He might. So but the risks in moving somebody like Ben Stokes with all the other stuff that he has to deal with in terms of setting the agenda for the team and all the other work, I'm quite happy with him where he is. But Johnny Bairstow is the one. Johnny Bairstow is the one that gets more affected by him bouncing up and down. Even the sort of the psychological effect of being preferred by the youngster to him. The knock to his ego that there would be if he was.
That's a good shout.
If Brook were to, it would be more detrimental to him to move him than it would be to anybody else. Is what I'm saying. In an imperfect world, there is my explanation for why that's the way I would go. Yeah. However, it's all completely moot because Zak Crawley will be playing.
So Brooks, what, 24, 25, something like that. Root would have been, what, 22?
I was just going to say the
23
2013
maybe in the 2013 Ashes when he opened the batting. Yeah. He got a couple, of course. He got a couple of good ones. He nicked off a couple of times. He also got 180 at Lords. The good players are good players. Rohit Sharma would make runs at 4 or he'd make runs as an opening bat, right? I think Mark's point about it not impacting long-term one way or the other on Brooks' undoubtedly 100 Test match career that's going to run furlough the next few years. I think it's absolutely bang on there. And I think it's a tantalising hit as well, because you imagine if it actually works. You imagine if he gets 450 runs, wins a game one afternoon.
Yeah, but I kind of think that about Stokes though. Opening, I think that is so tantalising. I think
like both ideas. I mean, I do like both ideas. I don't think either one would be wrong. I think the only wrong is Ben Stokes not playing. I think that's wrong. And then you do what you like with the rest.
So if Brook opens,
Ben Duckett might not play.
Right, yeah.
Sure. I mean, look, I don't know, but do you see what I mean? Yeah. I think the only wrong in this would be Ben Stokes losing his place and then handing the gloves to Johnny Bairstow. I think that's a bad place to start.
In this very hypothetical world, and Brooks opening, Stokes in the side, Stokes in the middle order as well. Would you be tempted to swap Stokes and Stokes in the order? So Stokes at 6. Stokes 7, Obviously, he had a really good test summer last year, but it's quite interesting that he performs very different roles for Surrey and England. He has never batted in the top 6 for England. He only bats in the top 6 for Surrey.
He's the glue in the Surrey side. You know, they've got hitting all-rounders from 7 down, and obviously they've got, you know, like minor genius in Pope just above him, but he is the glue in that middle order, kind of like a Collingwood-like role, if you like, that could be replicated in this England side. I can see the logic of it.
But why?
I think sometimes, especially with the tail England now have, I sometimes think that folks just doesn't get very long until he has to start thinking about batting in a way that he just doesn't do.
I wrote his profile on this year's Wisden, which is the 5, and I was speaking to him in Karachi about this, and he's saying it's interesting when he bats top 5 for Surrey, and he's always in with another batter, top order batter, so he can play his normal game. With England, he's in at 7, and very quickly he's in with a bowler. And England have a long tail now with, you know, possibly Leach or Broad at 8, or Potts or Robinson, whatever. It is an uncomfortably long tail. So he's having to reinvent the game he's learned at county cricket. With England now, moving him to 6 actually isn't a bad shout. I think that gives Stokes, okay, I've just said Stokes should open, but if in this hypothetical world Stokes is going in at 7, that also gives him a bit more licence. And let's face it, in New Zealand, Stokes was having a bit of a laugh with the bat, wasn't he? Really, he wasn't sort of getting the best out of himself, which is partly one of the reasons I think opening might refocus his mind a bit as a batter. And I think he has less to lose. He's at that stage of his career where it doesn't matter so much. I sort of slightly disagree about putting Brook up there as a risk.
Basically, he's played like it doesn't matter so much anyway, isn't he? For the last, you know,
it felt more extreme in New Zealand, I think. But.
Yeah, but even here last year, pretty similar.
On folks, I don't think people realise how good his record with the batting county is. So he averages 45 for Surrey his entire Surrey career. It's forget the gloves. He's in the conversation as one of the best middle order players in the.
He's drummed 100 as well in the first round.
Against Lancashire.
Under a bit of not spotlight again. You know, he's right in the prime of his time. I think now as a cricketer.
Going back to the awards, Lawrence, Ben Stokes was the leading cricketer of the year. Statistically, a guy who averages 36 with the bat, 30 with the ball. He had a pretty good T20 World Cup as well. Statistic doesn't leap off the page, but when we take a step back, how unique a year was this? How have we seen captains be this influential before when you take away their own contributions with bat and ball?
No, I don't think so. And that's why he got the award. I mean, his figures are okay. He played the match-winning innings in the T20 World Cup final. That was a pretty good innings. This is a guy who's transformed the way a Test team are playing, and maybe will have an impact on other Test sides. Took over the Test side. They'd won 1 out of 17. They were a bit of a laughing stock, let's face it. Come out of Ashes 4-0, drop Broad and Anderson in the Caribbean, lose that 1-0. Stokes comes in, people going, can he deal with all this? An extra job on his plate, and they win 10 out of 12 in spectacular fashion, nearly 5 and over. Even one of the tests they lose, they should have won by 1 run after enforcing the follow-on because they wanted to play golf. So he has got people talking about Test cricket. There is a word, Bazball, is being used to describe an entire style of play. Now, they don't like that, but let's be honest, if the sporting public are using a talking about cricket because they've heard of this thing called Bazball, well, that's means Test cricket's got as good a chance as it ever has had of being talked about. So Stokes has got Test cricket back in the public conversation, and that's why he won the award. He's transformed the way a format that's been going for nearly 150 years, is taking place.
Could I ask you then about your editor's notes, Lawrence, and in particular your comments on Test cricket? I'll just quote a few back at you if that's all right, but I want to make you blush.
Well, don't know if I'll blush.
It's strong and trenchant stuff, though, and absolutely needs to be said. But just to pick a couple of paragraphs out, more enterprise is needed to maintain interest in Test cricket. After the international fixture list confirmed a hopeless imbalance between this summer and the end of the 26-7 winter, England will play 20 of their 43 tests against Australia or India, and only those 3 teams will regularly contest meaningful series. We could go on. There's plenty more within that, of course. What drove you to write it, and what solutions can we try and unpick from this, as you put it, horrible imbalance?
Well, so this is the 12th Wisden I've done, and occasionally I've revisited this theme. It's a bit of a Wisden theme.
Funny
in a
how
way.
It comes around.
It comes around. I think this year more than ever, I was sitting there in January when I start writing the notes, and there were 5 T20 franchise tournaments going on around the world, many of them overlapping. It was impossible to follow. It must have been bewildering for sort of fans around the world. and the sense of meaning and jeopardy just wasn't there for me. And we've seen it. So England, India, and Australia are sort of okay because they can pay their players enough not to have to go on these. Well, India, of course, they're banned anyway, apart from the IPL. England, Australia can keep their players happy. The rest are going to hell, aren't they, really, in that respect? New Zealanders are not signing central contracts now. We're used to it with the West Indians. That's been happening for a while. Trent Boult doesn't play against England in the Test series because he's decided not to sign a central contract. So that immediately devalues that. Now, look, I get the arguments. I get market forces, etc., etc., but I don't think administrators have been honest about the extent to which the T20 juggernaut is crushing everything else. I like T20, but we have reached the point, it's not even crossroads, that cricket has decided which path it is taking, and administrators have let it happen. So I want a bit of everything. I want 5-day red ball cricket. I want 20-over white ball cricket. It's all fun. That's what part of cricket's charm. What are the solutions? Well, it's tricky. The moment private equity came into cricket was the moment, and that was several years ago, was the moment administrators lost control of the game. They've allowed it to happen bit by bit. What they have to do now is, it's a bit like climate change. You can't stop a lot of it. You can mitigate the worst effects possibly if you start now, and that might involve things like saying, look, Saudi Arabia, you can't start your own T20 tournament because we're not going to allow you to pilfer our players, a bit like the ILT20's done in the UAE. The national boards have let that happen, really.
And how realistically do they stop that, though? I mean, the IPL kind of started as a riposte to private money putting on a tournament where they were attracting players who were, whether they were in contract, out of contract, whatever it might have been, before the proliferation of a lot of international centrally contracted players. So what was it? It was the CPL? What was it? Is that what it was called?
ICL.
The ICL.
The ICL. Sorry, the ICL. And that all began because what can boards do to stop players from they get offered a large amount of money? They're not under contract anywhere, or their contracts are easily escaped from, and off they go. They play in a tournament that's not sanctioned. Doesn't have to be. Well, I mean, how do you do that realistically?
Look, the only solutions are idealistic, I'm afraid, because we've gone so far down the private equity route that to what we need. Someone said on Twitter, put it quite nicely recently. It was like we need a form of socialism, and we've got sort of uber capitalism running cricket. And essentially, what it needs is for the IPL franchises to not say we're going to take over the world. Well, it's not going to happen. So we have to. Countries like England and Australia, I think they have the biggest role to play in this, because India, we know which path they're going down. Can England and Australia not bend over backwards? Can they take a bit of a stance? And actually, Richard Thompson and Richard Gould, formerly of this parish, are speaking quite a good game. Even Thompson saying things like, we need to host Bangladesh. We haven't hosted since 2010. Now, I'm not saying that will save the cricket world, but it says something about the fact that, I think I say in the notes, that the big uns have to look after the little uns. We do need a form of socialism. I get that's naive. I get it's idealistic, but there is no other answer at the moment. Otherwise, we're just going to walk into this open. There'll be no proper Test cricket in 10 years' time, apart from the Ashes and maybe India.
Yeah.
So
socialism at Lords, Plum Warner would be turning in his grave.
Let's do it.
Another line on Richard Thompson, though, from your piece. If the game just chases money, it will devour itself. Now that's an interesting line.
That's Thompson saying that, not me, right?
Yeah, that's Thompson. That's the head boss of the ECB. It's hard to have imagined those words coming out of previous incumbents in that role, right? So that hints, at least, as you say, maybe talking a good game. You got to walk it as well. We shall wait and see. But
I guess the thing with that always is that you can't take a stand on your own.
Right.
You need allies, but hard hitting ones, and that's where there aren't very many. There aren't any left. I mean, Australia is the only other one. And in the end, you get run over by not being strong enough to stand up to the strongest. I mean, so here's a just a thought that flashed into my head around the idea of kind of being able to encourage the Test nations that are losing the will to live, literally, in Test cricket, is by having a summer here in the UK where you play sort of either a triangular or some sort of a tournament that involves England. So England play matches against two other nations in a sort of a round robin of Test match cricket. You end up with 7 Test matches in the summer, which you would do anyway. But there is something there for fan bases of the other teams as well. I mean, again, just literally off a fag packet. But in order to so that you don't because English cricket cannot afford to have a summer whereby your touring parties are Sri Lanka and the West Indies, followed up by. Do you understand?
Totally.
We know
Which-
the
which-
reality
so-
of it is you cannot have teams that do not attract large audiences or large amounts of interest coming in back-to-back summers. So what do? You invite two of them at once,
Right.
right?
Carrying on that idea, which is bang on, and I've been saying this for a while now, right? So you got the World Test Champs final here in 6 weeks' time, something like that. What's stopping the ICC with the buy-in from the boards of setting up a Test Championship summer over 6 weeks or 7 weeks, whatever it would need to be, and at the end of that run, of that 3-year run or whatever, the top 4 teams in the Test Champs table compete across 7 weeks. They play a round-robin game, a series of round robins, and then the finalists play maybe a 2-test series or a 3-test series. It's all completed within 7 weeks. And within that, so it's the length of a World Cup. Within that, you can have the full heft of the ICC's sponsorship partners, from Booking.com to IG to all the rest of them, whatever they are these days. And you'd have the eyes of the international cricketing world on a test match jamboree, a proper festival of test cricket, rather than this compelling and mouthwatering, but still here today, gone tomorrow, done in a week test final, where we didn't even really know who was going to be in it until 5 minutes before the end of a higgledy-piggledy table.
I mean, Test cricket has been slow to innovate in the past, and I think that's part of why it's in this position where the private entities that you're talking about don't feel like it's worth investing in.
Sorry, just as I'm thinking at the top of my head. So think of an Indian cricket fan, right? Obviously, awash with all the fun of the fair, right in the midst of it right now. They've got this final coming up, and for a week they're going to be gripped by what happens India-Australia. But you imagine if it's India, Australia, England, and Sri Lanka who finished third, I think, in that final table, all 4 of them together across a month and a half. Then you're sustaining that interest and that passion over a far wider stretch of time, and you're also engendering some real memories there, right? The problem for me with the Test Championship final is that it might just flutter away.
Yeah.
You know, if you're all out for 150 on the first morning because it's overcast, then it might be a bit of a dud game or an underwhelming experience. But if you have a proper circus for 6 weeks, I'd love to see that. I've been saying this for a while.
I mean, the issue always with the World Test final is that all of the games are all of the matches are bilateral series, so there's no eyes on them. You know, there's only the eyes that are interested in them at the time. There's no sort of feeling that this is a competition that everyone is contesting all at the same time, which is why bilateral cricket is still very, very important. You know, you have to have all of that type of stuff. But I guess what you're saying is if you have the back end of it contested all in front of everybody all at once, then everybody feels invested in the winner. At the moment,
right?
You know what I mean? India,
That's
Australia, getting there is quite important. You know, everyone gets reasonably excited about the World Test Championship when it looks like when you're trying to work out who the 2 finalists are going to be. But you've gone through 3 years of no one giving a toss up to that point. You know what I mean? It's and people the whole thing's a waste.
Sure, and people might argue, okay, well, if you just creep in 4th place, then do you really have the right to call yourself a world champion? But take that Sri Lanka example. They were 2 test matches away from being in that final.
Yeah.
And I think they actually ended up finishing 4th. And I think South Africa finished 3rd. But the point is, because of I think you try and mitigate against the imbalances of the table by putting a little bit more emphasis into it, right? You know,
definitely.
Really driving home the fact that you can one day claim to be a world champion, rather than it happening almost by accident.
I think the thing that I find quite interesting about the conversation now compared to maybe like a year ago is that we're now seeing the product being really affected by all this big scale change. So, for example, the Australia winter just gone, South Africa being that bad, that is really affecting the product of what Test cricket is. Butch mentioned Sri Lanka and West Indies. They are the 2 teams that are touring next year in England. 10, 15 years ago, you'd be really excited by that. And I know that Sri Lanka's had this resurgence, but the interest in Sri Lankan cricket is not, from a casual English fan perspective, as high as it would have been 15 years ago. That will affect ticket sales. And I think now is the first time we're really feeling that the test game is tangibly weaker than it used to be.
I think that's right. And actually, it's interesting. We always talk about money and how are we going to persuade the players to play Test cricket. But actually, what Brendan McCullum and Ben Stokes have done is say, no, we're going to make Test cricket exciting to play. I mean, it was interesting that when the squad for Pakistan, a guy like Liam Livingstone is quite happy to go there to play Test cricket, missing out on whichever was it, the Bangladesh Premier League or some
Big Bash.
He Big Bash. He turned down some money because he wanted to be part of that. Will Jacks, so these guys are suddenly tempted to play. Moeen Ali considered coming out of retirement for Test cricket because he wanted to be part of the fun. Now, you have to have the set of players to be able to do what England have done, but maybe that's another route. I mean, Andrew Strauss talked about this last year, and he said, well, there are other ways of getting people interested in Test cricket, and we all scoffed a bit because it's like, well, money is the only answer. But what England have shown is maybe it isn't. So I like your idea that the semis, because I think it's quite. If you've got a tournament that lasts 3 years, you want the teams who are 5th and 6th to think that they have a chance. You want them to keep playing. Now, England were out of it before Bazball started, weren't they? So it was kind of irrelevant.
One win in 17 does that.
1 win in 17, so they were gone. But actually, what you want to see, you really want to see England v someone in the final, didn't you? Playing Bazball in the World Test Championship final. So they probably wouldn't. They weren't even in the semis, would they?
Yeah.
No, they wouldn't. They finished.
They were so low down. But that so I like context in Test cricket. It has to have context because it's fighting against, all these other competitions. So the Walker plan does it for me.
Lovely.
What 1 win in 17 really was bad, wasn't it? Like,
It was
I know he said it.
utterly
I know he
dire.
talked about it all the time. But
It was
now a
real
year
bad.
on, that was bad, wasn't it?
That's some real insights there, boys.
It was real bad.
That's why we're the #1 UK podcast. Friend of the podcast, Matt Roller, asked a question directed at Lawrence. How close was Josh Buttler to the T20 award after captaining a World Cup winning team and winning the orange cap? That sounds like a pointed question.
That's a
It
leading
is a
question.
It's beautifully done.
Are you saying I mischose Suryakumar Yadav? Well, actually, it's a fair question because they were very close and I almost couldn't decide. I almost thought they both deserve it because Butler's runs came in the two most important competitions, T20 competitions in the world, the IPL and the World Cup. Yadav was out for 16 in the semi-final against England, which they breezed by 10 wickets. But 1,164 T20 international runs, strike rate of 187. I mean, those are ridiculous numbers by Yadav. And 48 ball 100 against England, 49 ball against New Zealand. I think the start of this year was a 45 ball 100 against Sri Lanka. He kind of reinvented. I know he's had a bad trot recently, just as we announced the award. But he probably more than Buttler, he has taken T20 batting to new heights. And imagine if we hadn't chosen him.
And also, I think a feature of T20 cricket in 2023 so far has been increased run rates. The PSL was the highest scoring PSL ever. IPL is the highest scoring IPL ever so far. And Yadav must have an influence in doing that. 187 is ridiculous. He's literally striking at 11 and over on average. That's ridiculous.
And besides, the English can't win them all, right, Lawrence?
Well, I'm not saying that was a factor. No, he was a worthy winner.
Yeah. He was a worthy winner, no doubt about it.
And you mentioned them earlier about how dominant the Australian women's side is, and it was a player from the Australian women's side, Beth Mooney, who was the leading women's player in the world this year.
Averaged 100 in one-day internationals last year. Scored 63 in the Ashes Test with titanium plates in her jaw after being hit in the nets by Matthew Mott, now the England white ball coach. Won the Commonwealth Gold, was player of the tournament. She did everything. And that Australian team is one of the great all-time sporting teams. I mean, they've gone under the radar slightly because, unfortunately, it's women's cricket, but they are so far ahead of the pack that everyone is willing them not to win just to kind of balance things out a bit. When India collapsed in the Commonwealth Games finally, we were like, you groaned slightly. But she stands out in an all-time great team. So, again, quite an easy one for us.
Bit of news today. Australia have announced a squad for the first half of their English summer. So the World Test Championship final and the first 2 Ashes Test matches. No real surprises there, but we've not really covered this on the podcast. But Marcus Harris was awarded a essential contract. He's been named in the squad. And I guess that is just quite interesting, Butch, around David Warner. So for so long, a permanent fixture in the Australian Test side, but he's not quite getting the backing that he previously has done. He's still in the squad for the first 3 Test matches. He's got a central contract, but that is a all-format central contract. And you kind of think, well, Marcus Harris isn't going to... he's not going to be in the ODI World Cup squad, is he? So why has he got a central contract and Khawaja's doing so well at the top? That kind of indicates that Warner's spot isn't safe for that second half of the Ashes series at least.
Yeah, and it's odd actually for Australia to seemingly hedge their bets like this. Actually, they're normally more brutal than that, aren't they? I mean, Warner's form, even looking at the IPL, he's just a bit of a. I think one of the things I read, I mean, it's not a world-beating quote, but shadow of his former self in terms of strike rate, in terms of just everything about his game, just looks a little bit less than. And of course, he comes to England where his record is very much less than. And Stuart Broad, the two of them could be making their final bows in Test match cricket together, and one of them very much has the upper hand in terms of that contest. So
he averaged 9.5 in the last series over here. I read this morning, and
it's just I don't know. The whole Aussie squad actually, albeit there's still some bloody good players there. It's going to be a really, really top series, and they've got some fabulous players there. It was a little bit less bold than perhaps I expected. In times gone by, even in teams that never got beat, that there would always be a couple of sort of brutal axings, and players very rarely managed to last. With the exception perhaps of Mark Taylor and Steve Waugh, prolonged periods of low productivity. So interesting, very interesting. But they have, as you said, they've got plenty of backup at the top of the order around him. And it's a 17-man squad for the first 3 Test matches, which again, I know in post-COVID times, 17 has become a little bit more the norm. But Australia used to sort of laugh at England taking 16, 17 plus, back in the old days. Say, well, if you haven't got a clue up to 15, then you really don't know what you're doing. So they've kind of it looks to me a little bit unsure, which does not mean by any means that Australia will not be very, very strong in contesting the Ashes. But it's going to take a heck of a lot for Warner to turn it round, I think.
Well, also in terms of hedging their bets, Matt Renshaw's in the squad. So Matt Renshaw,
that's what I mean. Renshaw, Khawaja, Harris, and Warner. You got 4 openers.
Yeah, and Renshaw almost literally didn't score a run in the India series, but he was back in the middle order.
At 5 or 6, didn't he? Yeah.
But he's been opening in the Australia A series against New Zealand and he got back-to-back hundreds. So obviously a contender to open as well. The Wisden shop has had a long-awaited restock of their cricket ball leather wallet made from premium Italian leather. The Wisden wallet is perfect for that cricket fan in your life. The touch and feel of the premium quality Italian leather and the distinctive cricket ball seam stitching are designed to give tangible, everyday reminders of the game we all love. Exclusively available at wisden.com/shop. Phil, we spent a nice Sunday together, didn't we? On the Surrey commentary.
Career highlight for me.
As you said on air.
Just slipping in next 2 years on a Sunday afternoon, it was beautiful.
We watched something quite special though, because I remember there's a point where this could be a really good game.
Before you go on, sorry, just as Mark said earlier, any old muppet can do it these days. He's absolutely right. As he walks in,
it is so easy, honestly.
Absolutely right. But sorry to cut in.
So Mark was spending his holiday in Tenerife, glued to the stream. I'm sure. But in that game, Surrey Hampshire, there was a period where we were like, this could be a really good finish. And then we were deprived of a really good finish because we saw a classic Ollie Pope knock. 100 off 70 in the evening session, 122 not out in the end. We had a question about him. How indicative is Pope's performances for his England form? He's played well for Surrey in the past and not always converted for England. How impressed were you by Pope? Was that like a different level to what we've seen before? It's a decent Hampshire attack.
Probably slightly more swaggering and flamboyant. But I think that is a consequence of what he's done the last 12 months in an England shirt. He now knows he's ensconced now as the golden boy of English cricket alongside Brooke. And his record out there is comparable with any of the great cricketing records, or it's certainly developing into it. He averages 93, 94 over a fair sample size now.
99 for Surrey.
It's 99 for
It's
Surrey.
95 first class throwing his Test match here.
Okay.
It's 99 for Surrey first class.
Yeah, I mean he scores an 81 and the average goes down.
Yeah, he's also just so damn watchable as well. I mean the creativity and the boldness. You can see how alert he is to the situation, and he's also desperate to play. And no, look, if you're playing like that, then it's a joy, of course. But
Helps if
There
you
are
average
certain
100.
I think I might have said it before about him on this show, no doubt I have. But there's certain cricketers that you get the sense that their love of the game maybe waxes and wanes a little bit, and if you know, there's slight sort of ambivalence about the game at times. With Pope, he doesn't want to rest at all. He wants to bat and bat and bat, and there's a sort of, he's got this lovely combination of boyish love for the game and now a fully formed proper cricketer, a hard-nosed cricketer as well. You were there, Lawrence, right?
I was. No, it was a treat. I mean, like you, I did feel slightly cheated. I wanted a great finish, and what I got was a fantastic innings by Pope, which is a pretty good consolation prize. And we talked earlier about Bairstow being the standard bearer of Bazball, followed by Brook. Pope's not been a million miles behind. The figures aren't quite there, but he has played some cracking knocks, and he's a good example of the kind of man management of the team. You know, the shocking Ashes, didn't play in the Caribbean. What does Stokes and McCullum do? They put him up to 3, where he'd never played before. There was that show of faith in itself sort of reignited him, I think.
Just on that very briefly, he contacted Stokes, didn't he, when Stokes got the gig, and Pope actively went to Stokes and said, "Remember me? I quite fancy it at 3. I think there might be a slot there." And Stokes said, "Well, it's funny you should say that because I think you're the best young cricketer in England." And 2 weeks later, he was batting at first drop. That shows that while he looks very undemonstrative and butter wouldn't melt, there's a steel to the kid as well, and a vaulting ambition there as well.
He's being talked about as Stokes' successor as Test captain, and if he's playing like that now, I mean, you do wonder what will happen when Stokes goes. Will England be able to keep playing the way they do? If Pope is batting like that now, that suggests he wants to keep that style of play going, scoops for 6 and so on, reverse sweeps. It was a joy to watch, and I was a bit worried about Pope's second innings in Wellington. It seemed a bit sort of frantic, and it was part of that little collapse that ultimately, I suppose, cost England the game. Though Root and Stokes almost got them over the line, and I thought that's interesting. But the way he's come out at the start of this season is very encouraging.
I do think it's quite interesting that Pope is so good in county cricket. He can get scores. Like I totally understand where that question came from. He can get scores, and I still think you can watch him and be like, I'm not really sure what that means. So the first innings, he scores 91. He didn't start well. We talked about the commentary. He nearly got out to Ian Holland. He kept on. Is very premeditated. He kept coming down the wicket when there weren't really easy runs on offer. And then in the second innings, I think partly because the match situation dictated he batted in a particular way, he was just pure class. And almost, he didn't have to premeditate almost. And I think that's when he's at his best, to just kind of batting naturally. It's almost when he's trying to do something extra.
Right. But
that's when things go wrong with him.
But he said himself, I remember he gave a very revealing interview to Joe, actually, 2 or 3 years ago, and he said he's always had a problem 0 to 20. Now, you could argue that every player in history has had a problem from 0 to 20, but he found that he wasn't playing his natural game, and that he was frenetic, and that he was trying to find a way to get from here to there. And I think having maybe underperformed for England in the first 15, 20 test matches, he made that 100 at Port Elizabeth, but not much else. I think freed up by the doctrine, the Bazball doctrine, whatever we want to call it, I think that's helped him crystallise this way of going. And it is, on the surface, quite funky, and it's rare to see a player at first drop run down the pitch to Norkia as he did last summer, and yet it's his way, I think, of getting the blood pumping, getting him going, because he would rather be out charging at somebody than prodding a little bit indeterminately outside off stump.
I think.
What do you think?
I remember the innings. I remember the innings that he played at Lords in the match that England lost against South Africa, and he got 70, I think, in the first innings.
Yeah.
And it was going all over the place, right? Swinging and seaming. Norkie was bowling quick and whatever. But he was the only guy who actually seemed to have. He just had a sort of a plan as to, okay, well, there's some terrific deliveries knocking around here. I'm going to get a good one at some point. And so he did run down the pitch. He did try and get slightly offside of the ball to nudge it into the leg side to get off strike and all that type of stuff. And it certainly wasn't something. It was something that would have had people leaping out, coaches leaping out of their seats and banging on the windows in the past. What the hell is this guy doing? He's batting at number 3 for England. But it seemed a better option. And this is me watching it as a commentator. I was up there watching it. It seemed a hell of a lot better option than standing there and trying to play for your off stump. And so, you know, you have to, as with all of this, you have to use sort of judgment, and it's not sort of running down to try and have a slog or whatever. But I think if you can, particularly, it's like if you're a bowler, right, and the pitch is green, and you're bowling 85 clicks, and it's nibbling all over the place. Why would you run up and bowl a load of slower balls and go for yorkers and bounces and that sort of stuff? The more help you're getting from the surface, the less you have to do. You just be accurate. Wear a hole in it, shoebox size, off stump, top of off, and you will get wickets. And similarly with batting, if the ball is going all over the shop, then there's not a great deal of point in just staying in your bunker and allowing the bowlers to run up and bowl into that shoebox. You've got to try and do something else, and you're on more of a hiding to nothing by standing still and being bowled at than you are having a little bit of a dip and just trying to put them off. But again, it requires a heck of a lot of courage, great hand-eye coordination, and actually quite a lot of self-belief in yourself, because you're going to make yourself look daft every once in a while. But I think one of the great things about the England dressing room at the moment is there is no problem with making yourself look a bit silly. You're not, people aren't sniggering behind the copies of the Times, sort of going, "What's this clown up to?"
Is that what happened to you?
I never ran.
Probably
should have run down the wicket a bit more. No, but somebody like Alistair Brown, he was but old teammate of mine, way ahead of his time in terms of sort of one-day cricket. Because he ran down the wicket when it was going all over the shop against Prasad and Srinath and people like that in one-day internationals, they literally wrote that he was a clown. He got 100 in the game, by the way. Or in the next one-day international, and never played again. The appearances were more important than the end product in days gone by. This England dressing room is like, I don't give a crap. Run down the wicket, get your leg poles knocked out. Doesn't matter. What was your thinking behind it? Why were you taking that approach? If you're happy with it and you do it again tomorrow, then fine, we don't care. And in doing that, you've allowed players to find a method of scoring runs, because at the end of it all, that's the bottom line. And Ollie Pope, batting at 3, having never done it, was unbelievably impressive during the course of last summer, I thought, on some really tricky surfaces, getting some good bowling. And it is no surprise to me that somebody who had already dominated at county level was always going to make it at Test match level. I'd never thought for a second that he wouldn't crack it at some point. But then now he goes back to county cricket and he just looks like a titan. He's like so much better than the next guy, because you just, I had it to a very, very much lesser extent, not talking about my career, but just the feeling that you had when you've been successful at Test level coming back to county level. It was like you were playing against boys rather than people who were your peers, and Ollie Pope will have that to a hell of a lot better extent than I ever did, So it's no surprise that he did what he did the other day.
The biggest news though from the Hampshire game was that during the rain delay on day 2, Keith Barker confirmed the story about Mohamed Abbas and Pep Guardiola that Cam talked about on last week's pod. So I don't know if you've seen this, but I'll go over it again because it's quite a funny story. Essentially, Mohamed Abbas stays in the premium penthouse suite at the Ageas Bowl Hotel, and when Southampton played Man City, there was a request for Pep Guardiola to have that suite, and Hampshire basically said, "No, that's Mohamed Abbas's suite." And we clipped this up, put it on Instagram, and during the rain delay, Keith Barker replied saying, "This is 100% true. The head of ops at Hampshire is an Arsenal fan," which is excellent. Lawrence, briefly on Northants, they had a good win this week, and a couple of maybe not they're not huge name overseas signings, but both the 2 Aussie recruits who aren't anywhere near the Australian Test squad have done pretty well for them in that game, at least.
Yeah, in that game, Whiteman got some runs second innings, chasing 120, which, as a lifelong Northants fan, I thought was going to be beyond us. But he helped get us over the line, having not scored anything in the first 3 innings. And then Tremaine, this seam bowler, who looks quite an English seamer, actually. But he sort of lands it, on a good length, moves it both ways, relishes his wickets. A lot of fist pumping, and it's good to watch, actually. So that he's kind of almost been plucked from over. They've got a strong seam attack, Northants. It's the batting I'm slightly concerned about. They haven't got a batting point yet, but then nor have a couple of other teams in that division. There could be a lot of bun fights, I think, this season. So to beat Middlesex, who are already shaping up as relegation rivals, was quite a big result early on.
Definitely.
100 for my man Jack Haynes. I like him a lot. Saw some of that. Good 100 against a good Durham attack. Durham won that game playing an ultra-aggressive form of the game.
I've got an email on this.
Oh, okay, go for it.
So Jamie writes in say, I'm not sure if it's worthy of a mention on the pod. It definitely is. but having watched every single ball of Durham's first 2 matches, first on YouTube and second at the ground, I can say in terms of intent and style, it is right from the England model. They've lost one, they've won one, but they were both unbelievable games, which Durham were very happy to risk losing to force a result. Not just run rate, they were often going at 5 and over, but they're happy to concede runs in search of wickets. Last season was tough, but this was genuinely entertaining. Not sure if it's happening elsewhere in the country. I've actually been surprised.
The coach, Ryan Campbell?
Ryan Campbell.
He said this at the start of the season as well, that they were going to go at it hard. And it's playing out. Conversely, very delayed declaration at Chelmsford, Lancashire, Essex.
That was weird.
It was an odd one, wasn't it? Especially as Essex, can barely get past 300 on a road at the moment, and they ended up spluttering to 4 or 5 down. I think nowhere near the 300 and plus that Keaton Jennings set Essex across 2 sessions. And these are the kinds of results that come the end of the story. You look at those kinds of games. If they'd given themselves 75 overs with Anderson with a new ball, they'd have probably won that game.
They basically gave Essex as many runs to chase in 2 sessions as Ben Stokes gave Pakistan in 4 sessions at Rawalpindi. Right. So the memo has not dropped with Lancashire. That was a really strange decision.
Anderson got Cook out twice.
Yeah.
First one was a bit iffy.
First innings was a shocker.
Yeah. County streams are good for most people in the game, but they're not great for umpires occasionally. Phil, you want to make a point about the Zak Crawley discourse. He got a couple of low scores this week, and talking of not great umpiring decisions, the second one was a shocker. It wasn't close to being out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this goes in at the end because it feels a bit of a non sequitur, to be honest. But
I think it's worth saying.
It struck me. I was actually having a conversation with my dad, right, about our football team that we both support, and it's the Spurs. Okay, whatever. But the discourse around it is so miserable, so awful that it sort of deepens the sadness. Right now, you've got honest footballers in that team who are given dog's abuse on Twitter, and it's out of control. And I'm no doubt every club has the same problem. The vile abuse that is directed at individuals is off the charts. Now, cricket is a more decorous world, right? Generally, but I'm feeling it creeping in more and more. Now, Zak Crawley, on the balance of play, shouldn't open the batting in the next Test match, and he's not got enough runs. But it's becoming very personal and very vicious, and I would hate that cricket would to drag itself into this sort of vile ugliness that football is being kind of poisoned by. And I would hate the thought that cricket would be pulled into that world as well, right? And while Zak Crawley's done nothing wrong this year, he made a very good 90 in a low-scoring game that they won by a few wickets when no one else got any runs in that first innings. Then he failed twice, and then he got a shocker. Now, all right, it adds up to averaging 25, which isn't enough, sure. Okay, I don't dispute the numbers, but it's become personal against this kid, and I don't like it. I didn't like what we did, what Wisden.com did. We clipped up a graphic. Zak Crawley's scores. Zak Crawley's now failed. Blah blah blah. Zak Crawley's poor form continues. ... I didn't like it from us. I don't like it across the board. Really, have conversations about players, about permutations, about lineups for sure. But you got to remember that these are just young kids just trying to make their way, trying to survive in a pressure cooker that is unlike anything you've ever imagined sporting-wise. Mark, you played for England 70 times. It's not like it is now. If you have a weak moment and at midnight after a drink, you think, right, I'm going to put my name into Twitter or Instagram. I mean, not now, you're fine. But you know what I mean? It would be devastating for a lot of these players.
I think what is really difficult, I completely agree with what you're saying. I think what is difficult, though, is that I think you should be allowed to say Zak Crawley is not scoring runs. So, for example, a lot of what ends up happening is that people maliciously latch on to stuff that just says that. If you are the incumbent England opening batter and you average 29 in first-class cricket, it is okay for people to say you average 29 in first-class cricket. The issue, and I think that people in the media should be allowed to say that, the issue is that whenever you say that, I know people will react to this conversation in a mean way. There will be people who do that. And I find that quite difficult to grapple with. because I think we should still be able to say that Zak Crawley's not scoring runs. Do you get what I'm saying?
I do, and I'm not putting the boot in on the social media team of the company that we work for. I'm not doing that.
It'd be a bad call. I mean,
yeah, there's the door, Philbo. Yeah, I don't know. I just want us to be a bit kinder, I suppose, to these cricketers who are struggling, doing one of the toughest jobs out there.
Well, it's interesting. Harry Brook struggles the first 3 innings in the IPL and scores 100 off 55. One of the first things he says to Harsha Bhogle afterwards is like, I hope this shuts a few Indian fans up. And that was a reaction to what he was picking up on social media. It was a good lesson to probably stay off Twitter, mate, at the moment.
Stay off it for your career,
stay
probably.
Off it because,
So I was kind of following that because the inference was, particularly after the first, it might even have been just after his first innings in the IPL, was that he's been at the PSL where anyone can score runs there, and it's all part of the narrative that India is better than Pakistan, Pakistan's better than India, that whole nonsense. Simon Dahl got caught up in that, funnily enough. There was some made-up quote from him saying that he couldn't wait to get out of Pakistan, had been locked up like a prisoner for months, and now he's in the proper place of India. Well, that's a bullshit. I was with Dooley, and I can tell you, we weren't locked up anywhere. Not that we didn't want to be anyway. Nowhere that we wouldn't have chosen gladly. So there's another narrative there with India. But after 2 games, it was like he's the most overrated, most overpriced player, whatever, and then he scores 100. Does what we expect him to do at some point. 100 off 55 balls. And actually, funnily enough, the interesting thing was, because there's quite a lot of players who wouldn't have done what he did, wouldn't have come out and mentioned it like that. But one of the great things about being there in India is that they're actually quite happy to cut. It's not like here with football and the other sort of arguments that you can have about other things that polarize people in this country. Where nobody ever backs down or ever changes their mind, kind of entrench themselves and dig in even further. They actually just go, oh, you know what? Yeah, okay, we were wrong. You were right. You're brilliant. It just flips just like that. All he had to do was make the runs. So I was kind of because if somebody had done that here. If somebody had done, would have come straight out first interview against NASA. There you go. I told you I'm brilliant. You're all rubbish. Blah, blah, blah. And people would have piled in on him even more. Over there, they just went, yeah, okay, fair enough. And just let him get on with it. So, there's a slight naivety in the abuse over there, which is, if you're uninitiated, can be really, really horrible. The language used. However, it's not quite the same as the abuse you get over here, funnily enough.
I loved his I love all his comments after 100. He was asked where it ranks compared to his 4 Test 100s, and he said obviously the 4 Test 100s are better. But I was like, you didn't smile when you scored any of them, and you definitely smiled when you scored that. I enjoyed that. Before we get on to the IPL, the women's domestic season kicks off this weekend. Phil, there's a preview for that in the upcoming magazine. That Joe and Katya put together.
Yeah, just very briefly, full preview of the whole domestic season upcoming. The 8 sides now expanded, of course, for the new season, and Katya and Joe have interviewed a prominent player from each of the teams. So there's not enough coverage of women's domestic cricket generally, but hopefully this is a sign that it will be more followed, more respected, as the standard, of course, continues to soar. And if you are interested, then pick up the magazine when it's out in a week and a half's time, because it'll give you all the details that you need, the upcoming fixtures, the inside track on each of the teams.
And I think especially interesting with the Ashes coming up, but also after a really good winter for the women's game. If you're after a storyline to follow at the start of the Rachel Heo Flint Trophy, all eyes on Grace Scrivens. So she was player of the tournament for England as they got to under-19 World Cup final. She's had a truly ridiculous week. So she scored 200 in 4 days, the second of which in a game where no one else in her team passed 10. So that's pretty good going. And you've seen how quickly Alice Capsey has gone from no one heard of her to being in the England side and a star of the England side, star in the IPL. Scrivens is actually older than Capsey, but still very young. So I'll be interested to see how she develops over the early few weeks in the summer. Let's head to Wisden India editor Adya Sharma, who's going to tell us everything about the IPL over the last 6 or 7 days. Before we finish the show, we're going to hear from Abhishek Mukherjee, the Wisden India head of content. Abhishek, you're joining us live from the ground at Delhi, where rain dependent we'll see Delhi play KKR later today. But before we talk about what's to come, let's talk about some English involvement in the IPL over the last few days. In particular, Harry Brook. He scored 100, his first IPL 100. There's understandably a lot of excitement around Brook in the UK, given what he's done in his short England career so far. He then got picked up for big money in the IPL, but as we've seen in the past, that's no guarantee of IPL success. How is Brook viewed in India, and how impressive was that 100?
See, Brook has a phenomenal start in Test cricket. So those numbers, first of all, England has got the neutrals speaking about Test cricket, and Brook is part of that. Brook is a major reason for that neutrals are talking Test cricket. There was appreciation for Brook, but there was also, the feeling, the usual, let him prove himself in India and then we'll acknowledge feeling. That's always there. So he went for big money. There was anticipation. Then he failed. His record against spin was dug up. And then analysis began. But if you ask me, it was only a matter of time. He was too gifted to fail. You can see his talent is too obvious.
Yeah.
So he found a way. He didn't attack the spinner. He found a way to get that 100.
Yeah, in a way, that was probably what was most impressive for me, because he's been moved up to the top of the order. Something I know that every T20 batter will want to open the batting. It's probably the easiest job in T20 cricket. But he, as you say, he struggled a little bit against spin, and he went so hard against the pacers that he could afford to be much more reserved against the spin. But also, he could do it because of his teammates around him were going very hard against spin. So actually, as a partnership, they were always going at a pretty good rate. So it was actually incredibly impressive innings management from Brook.
He didn't try to do anything out of his comfort zone. He knew which bowlers to target. And Kolkata Knight Riders typically have always had a very strong spin attack. He knew that Narayan was not the one he would attack. And he did exactly that.
Can you remember a young overseas batter with this much hype around them this early in their career? Because the top T20 batters are all late 20s and above, really. You got some exciting young players like Brevis and Stubbs, etc., but they're not necessarily getting on the park. There haven't been that many batters like Brook coming over to India in the last few years.
Brevis, the hype around Brevis was somewhat due to the Under-19 World Cup. That made him a superstar, and the similarities with De Villiers. So before Brevis actually did anything, some videos of him started doing the round. So that Baby AB name, I think, was coined before he did so well in the Under-19 World Cup. And the Under-19 World Cup is actually very keenly followed in India. So, India have, I think, lost just 2 matches across the last 4 editions. So, that has generated a very strong followership. So, the hype around Brevis was largely due to his under-19 performances. But Brook, yes, as you mentioned, Brook has been part of the Test cricket revolution over the past 1 year.
I wanted to talk about a Rajasthan Royals game. There was an odd game the other day where they failed to chase 155, having been 87 for naught after 11 and a bit overs. Josh Buttler fell for 40 off 41, which is an uncharacteristic Buttler innings. What do you think happened there? First, with Rajasthan failing to chase down 155 from being in such a good position, but also Buttler striking at less than 100.
At the innings break, I thought it would be a cakewalk. So I think last year Buttler on several occasions Buttler actually started off slow and took the game very deep and finished them off either while batting first or while chasing. But Buttler did that. They probably left too much for too late. They have 4 batters who strike at about 140 in this tournament. 5 if you include Jurel. But the other two, I think Parag has been striking at 109, Padikkal has had 113, and they left too much for Parag and Padikkal. Parag and Padikkal also have a strike rate around in the low 120s in the IPL. So that is not the best possible pair to back together when your it is mounting. So and regarding Butler, I think he backed himself to bat until the 18th, 19th over and finish the game.
So you think that Rajasthan Royals kind of had a game like that coming with having those two guys, Padikkal and Parag in the middle order?
If you ask me, one of them, I mean, there's no place for both of them. One is still fine, but not two of them. Two players with strike rates in low 120s cannot play in a T20 side. Padikkal is a special talent, but his place is at the top, and there's no place in the top 3 in this Rajasthan Royals side. He would be a very good fit in another side, but not this Rajasthan Royals side.
On the Royals, a more positive look at how they've done recently. Ravichandran Ashwin is having a sensational tournament. He's taking wickets. He's going at just over a run a ball. He's obviously a titan of Test cricket, but he's not often had IPLs like this. What's he doing so well or differently to recent years? Because his numbers are brilliant at the moment.
If you ask me, this is purely from eye observation. He has been more accurate. And there have been certain dismissals where you could see he is plotting out dismissals just like in longer formats. He's tossing them up, allowing a boundary, but he's buying wickets. We saw that with Dubey in one of the matches. Dubey hit him down the ground for 4. He still tossed the next one up outside off, and Dubey went for a wild slog and missed it. And then he bowled a fast straight one, and Dubey had no answer. So this is how he has set up batters in the longer formats. He is now just replicating T20s. That is one thing. And the Rajasthan Royals attack is perhaps the best in this IPL. They are just feeding off each other as well. So Bolt, sometimes he takes 1 or 2 wickets first up, bowls needed. So the stage is already set for Ashwin, and Ashwin bowls alongside Chahal. That is always dangerous if you thrive off each other. So that is another thing. Being part of a very good bowling attack basically benefits everyone in the bowling attack.
We're now a couple of weeks into the tournament. We've seen a lot of cricket. We've seen every side play a few games each. Who do you think are favourites at this point in the competition?
Gujarat and Rajasthan, both of them.
What do you think
Rajasthan, despite the defeat, I would put Rajasthan slightly ahead, but Gujarat as well, very close.
What is it about Gujarat that you like?
They basically stuck to last year's formula. They have a reasonably good bowling attack, and their bowlers go for wickets. And they have Rashid Khan, who is basically, that gets you 4 overs guaranteed of basically nothing happening against you. And then Rashid is usually supported by very strong fast bowlers. In batting, Ridhiman Shah is one of the more underrated. He has a very good IPL strike rate. So in power play overs, he has the 3rd best strike rate with a 1,000-run cutoff among Indians after Shaw and Sehwag. He's basically that level.
Wow.
So that goes unnoticed. His Test wicket keeping is more in focus. So along with him, they have Gill, and then they have Pandya, Miller, and now Tewatia, and now they have Vijay Shankar and Sai Sudarshan. So their middle order has found shape. Along with that, they have a very good bowling attack. So they look a very solid side. Maybe if you put me in the long run, unless Rajasthan sorts out this middle order thing, I would put Gujarat ahead of Rajasthan.
Interesting. One observation I've just had. We've got the Punjab RCB game on at the moment, and I just feel that in this year's tournament, more than any other, and I know this isn't the first year of having an expanded tournament, but I do sense that you have more games where a side just doesn't have that much star power on paper. And I know the injuries have been a big problem for that this season as well. We've had a almost unprecedented number of injuries. But would you share that take? Do you think that the tournament feels a little bit light on star power to how it normally has? No disrespect to him, but Players like Matthew Short, an uncapped 27-year-old batter, is not the kind of guy who ends up playing that much in IPL matches in years gone by?
Punjab, I think if Livingston fits into that role, if he steps up, then and Karan is already. I can see them trusting Karan for a long run because they have already made him captain, which is something he had never done before. And then they have Rabada. So Livingston will probably replace Short. But yes, they have also found some new heroes. I mean, won't say new, but they have got cricketers who have went for Punjab, like Prabhsimran Singh, Jitesh Sharma. So they are not big names. And Ashdeep Singh, of course, he is more or less known now, but these are cricketers who were groomed by Punjab. So Punjab has been trying out new faces, and this has been their trend. Short as well. Short is coming off a very good BBL season. So they have a tendency to back cricketers. Some of their backings do not come up, but some of them do.
Well, thanks a lot for your time, Abhishek. I hope the rain clears off in Delhi, and we'll catch you. We'll catch you soon. Phil, we're gonna end the show on a somber note. Simon Prodger passed away this week. Simon actually appeared on the podcast a few years ago. You knew Simon well. Do you want to say a few words about him?
I was done in by this. Simon Prodger was a beautiful human being, one of the real good guys of cricket. Not famous, not particularly rich, but gave his all to the game, believed in cricket as a force for good. He was the MD of the National Cricket Conference. He was, just let me get this exactly right. He was managing director of the National Cricket Conference, secretary of the Club Cricket Conference. He was a fine cricketer himself, good left-hander. He was involved at Harlow Cricket Club, at Hoddesdon, Harefield, Watford Town, where he was chairman. And he was the sort of bloke that was ahead of his time. He was talking about the absolute essential value of integrating disparate communities before it became the absolute necessity to be talking about these things. He recognised the value of developing community cricket, and he's been doing it for years. He was instrumental in setting up the National Asian Cricket Council. The African Caribbean Cricket Association, he was involved in setting that up as well. He played for a travelling Afro-Caribbean side on a Sunday as often the only white player there. He was a lovable bloke, and he dropped down dead a week and a half ago. He'd picked his team for the NCC representative 11 for or squad for the summer. I think they sent the emails out to the players. Congratulations, you're going to be representing Southern England club cricket, and had a heart attack the following morning and never came out of hospital. So anyway, I just want to briefly say that if you did know him, then there is a fund, a Simon Prodger fund that the NCC, the National Cricket Conference, is setting up to continue his good work. And if you are interested in sending a few quid over to that, then trust me, it will go to good causes within the game, and we can stick the details on the bottom of the podcast. So yeah, sorry to end on a somber note, but he was a top man.
Well said. That is all the time we have on today's show. Cheers, Phil. Cheers, Mark. Cheers, Lauren. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly Podcast. We're going to be back next week, and we've got an extra special interview that I'm sure our pod listeners will enjoy.